The night of my 30th birthday, my in-laws used the champagne toast to tell the entire room I had been stealing from the family. Not borrowing, not mismanaging, stealing. My mother-in-law stood up with her glass still raised, smiled like she was about to say something warm, and then announced in front of 47 guests, her side, his side, neighbors, his college friends, our old landlord for some reason, that I had been skimming money from the family renovation account for the past 2 years. My father-in-law nodded along from his seat like he was approving a PowerPoint. My husband, standing 3 feet to my left, said nothing. That was the part I kept coming back to afterward, not the lie itself. The silence beside me. I didn't throw anything. I didn't cry. I didn't do what every version of me that had spent 30 years being the reasonable one in every room would have done, which was apologize and try to explain and make myself small enough for the accusation to stop fitting me. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate very carefully, and I looked at my mother-in-law across that table full of candlelight and white hydrangeas, and I said clearly enough for the people nearest to us to hear, "That is not true, and you know it." Then I picked up my coat and left my own birthday party. 48 hours later, the whole thing started to fall apart. Not my marriage, the family business they had quietly built on top of me for 3 years, without ever once attaching my name to it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Tell me something first. What time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I genuinely want to know how far this gets. My name is Ren, and before any of this happened, I was a project accountant for a mid-size regional construction firm in Raleigh. That matters because it tells you exactly what kind of person I am. I'm the one who tracks where the money actually goes. I build budget reconciliation spreadsheets that hold up under audit. I notice when invoices don't match purchase orders. I flag problems before they become lawsuits. Quietly, professionally, without drama, because drama is expensive and I prefer accuracy. I am not the kind of person who skims renovation accounts. I married into the Ashford family 3 years before the birthday dinner. My husband, I'll call him Grant, is the younger of 2 sons in a family that owns a property development company that buys distressed historic buildings in smaller North Carolina towns, renovates them, and sells or rents them. His parents, Celeste and Ted, started it in the 90s. His older brother handles acquisitions. Grant handles client relations, which really means he handles charm. He is extremely good at charm. What none of them were good at was the financial infrastructure. Grant's family operated the way a lot of family businesses do, on momentum, personal relationships, and a deep institutional confidence that someone would figure out the messy details before things got critical. When I came into the picture, that someone became me. Not officially, not with a title or salary or even a formal arrangement. Just slowly, the way water finds cracks. It started small. Ted asked me to look over a contractor invoice because the line items seemed off to him, and Grant mentioned I was good with numbers. I found 3 billing errors and a misclassified material cost that would have hit them at tax time. Celeste asked if I could help set up a vendor tracking system because they kept losing track of who had been paid. I built one over a weekend and showed her how to use it. Grant's brother misread a historic renovation grant application and almost missed the eligibility window. I caught it, restructured the budget narrative, and filed the supplemental documents that kept the application alive. That grant came through. 6 figures. Nobody mentioned my name at the celebration dinner. By the 2nd year, I was quietly doing the following things for the Ashford business: reconciling monthly project accounts against bank statements, reviewing subcontractor lien waivers before draw requests were submitted, maintaining the document library for their historic tax credit certifications, tracking insurance certificate renewals for every active vendor, preparing financial summaries for investor meetings, and managing the reporting schedule for 2 separate renovation grant programs. None of this was in my job description. My job description, officially, was wife. I want to be fair here. I didn't do any of it under protest, at least not in the beginning. I love a spreadsheet the way some people love a puzzle. I was good at it. The work was real and it mattered, and when something I built kept a project from going sideways, there was a quiet satisfaction in that I genuinely valued. But somewhere in year 2, the appreciation curdled into assumption. Celeste stopped saying thank you and started saying can you? Ted stopped asking if I had bandwidth and started forwarding emails directly to me with no subject line, just an attachment and the implicit understanding that I would handle it. Grant, when anyone in his family asked who managed a particular system or document, would say something vague, like, "Oh, we have that covered," and move on. We. I was the we. I just didn't have any of the we in my name. By the time my 30th birthday came around, I had been managing a revolving portfolio of tasks that would have cost the Ashford Company somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 a year in professional fees if they'd hired for them properly. I had reviewed over 200 invoices. I had maintained compliance documentation across 4 active renovation projects. I had caught a duplicate payment to a subcontractor that would have cost them $14,000. I had identified a grant reporting error that, left unfiled, would have triggered a partial clawback of funds already spent. I had also, in the months before my birthday, quietly begun to suspect that something was wrong. Not wrong with the accounts I managed, wrong with the accounts I wasn't allowed to see. Ted handled the ownership-level financials personally. Grant's brother had signatory authority on the main operating account. I worked downstream, project accounts, vendor records, grant administration, but there was a layer above me that was opaque in a way that had never bothered me until I noticed a pattern. Vendor payments I had approved at the project level weren't always showing up correctly in the summary reports Ted shared at family dinners. Amounts were close but not exact. Categories shifted slightly. I mentioned it to Grant once, and he said his dad had probably just reclassified something for tax purposes, and I should ask Ted directly if it was bothering me. I didn't ask Ted directly. I started keeping a parallel record instead. That was the last thing I was doing with the Ashford business data before my birthday dinner. A quiet, private audit of every project account I had access to, cross-referenced against the vendor payments and grant disbursements I had personally processed. I hadn't shown it to anyone. I was still pulling threads. Then Celeste stood up at the champagne toast and told 47 people I was the one stealing. I drove home that night alone because Grant stayed to manage the fallout, which meant manage his mother, which meant manage the story she was telling. Becca, my closest friend from college, called me before I even got to the highway. She had heard through someone who had been at the party. "Are you okay?" she asked. I thought about it for a real second. "No," I said, "but I'm not wrong, and that's the part that matters right now." She told me to come to her place. I drove to my apartment instead because there were things I needed to look at. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning, not crying, not spiraling, just pulling up every file I had ever created for the Ashford business and making a new kind of document. Not a personal record. A professional one, the kind of document you create when you need a complete picture and you need it to hold up under scrutiny. I started with the labor. Every task I had performed, dated with associated project codes, estimated hours based on my firm's standard billing rates for equivalent work, and any correspondence that documented the request, my response, and the outcome. I had kept everything, not because I was paranoid, because I'm an accountant and I keep everything. My email archive alone went back to the first weekend I'd fixed their vendor invoices. Then I moved to the financial discrepancies I had been quietly documenting for the past 3 months. The pattern was clearer once I had everything laid out in one place. Certain vendor payments had been recorded at higher amounts in the owner-level books than the invoices I had approved. The differences were small enough to look like rounding or reclassification. The aggregate over 18 months was not small. I wasn't ready to call it anything. I'm an accountant, not an investigator, and I know the difference between a red flag and a finding, but I noted everything. Every line, every date, every variance. By 3 in the morning, I had 2 documents. One showed the Ashford Company what my unpaid contribution had actually been worth. The others suggested they had a problem that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with who actually had access to the numbers I wasn't allowed to see. Grant came home at midnight. He looked tired and slightly relieved in the way people look when they've done the bare minimum amount of management and are hoping that counts. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said his parents were upset. His mother had spoken out of frustration. She hadn't really meant it the way it sounded. I looked at him for a long moment. "Which part?" I said. "The stealing accusation, or the part where she said it in front of 47 people at my birthday party?" He said, "Ren. Just my name." Like that was a response. I closed my laptop and told him I needed to think, and he went to bed, and I sat there until the sky started to lighten outside the window, reading back through every email Celeste had ever sent me asking for help. There were 214 of them. The next morning, I did something that felt completely calm and completely irreversible at the same time. I drafted an email to Ted and Celeste, copied Grant and his brother, and sent it before I could second-guess the wording. The subject line was, "Withdrawal from Ashford Group Administrative and Financial Support Roles." I wrote that, effective immediately. I was stepping back from all unpaid operational work I had been performing for Ashford Group, including grant administration, vendor document management, invoice review and reconciliation, compliance tracking, and financial summary preparation. I noted that I had attached a transition document listing every active file, reporting deadline, vendor contact, and renewal date currently tied to my involvement. I explained that any tasks requiring my professional judgment, signature, or account access would need to be reassigned to a qualified person within 7 days, as I would be removing my access and credentials at that point. I did not mention the birthday party. I did not mention the accusation. I did not say, "You told a room full of people I was stealing while I was the one keeping your books clean." I sent it, then forwarded the transition document to Donna, their office manager, separately, with a note that explained she should feel free to call me if anything on the list was unclear. I liked Donna. She had always treated me like a person rather than a utility. Grant called me from the bedroom 20 minutes later, even though he was 11 feet away. "What did you send?" "A transition document," I said. "Mom is calling me." "I imagine she is." He appeared in the kitchen doorway in yesterday's shirt, phone in one hand, looking like a man who had just realized the bridge he'd been standing on was built by someone else. "Can we just talk about this before you do anything big?" "I sent an email," I said. "That's all." Then I poured coffee and left for work. The next few days were a particular kind of quiet. The kind where you know something is building behind a door and you've made your peace with whatever comes through it. Celeste called me once. I let it go to voicemail. She said she had been emotional and things had come out wrong, and she hoped we could sit down as a family and clear the air. No mention of the word stealing. No mention of 47 witnesses. No mention of any specifics at all, just the hovering suggestion that if I would come back to the table, we could all agree it hadn't meant what it sounded like. Ted didn't call. He sent a text that said, "Grant tells me you've stopped supporting the business. Need you to understand this puts active projects at risk. I want you to notice the verb in that sentence. Supporting. Not doing your job, because it had never been my job. Just supporting, the way you support a friend, the way you support a cause. The word that makes labor sound like love, so nobody has to pay for it." I did not respond to Ted. Grant's brother called me on the third day from a number I didn't immediately recognize. He had always been polite to me in a distracted, marginally warm way, the kind of polite that requires no real effort because it's never asked to do anything. He said he understood there had been a difficult situation at the party and he wasn't there, so he couldn't speak to that. But the grant reporting deadline for the Millbrook property was in 11 days, and the quarterly draw request for Caldwell Street needed reconciliation before the bank would release the next tranche, and he wanted to know if I would be stepping back in before those dates. "Did you read the transition document I sent?" I asked. He hadn't. "Everything you just described is addressed in it," I said. "Page 3 for Millbrook. Page 5 for Caldwell Street." He went quiet for a moment. Then, "It would really be faster if you just walked me through it." That sentence has a particular music to it when you've heard it your whole professional life. Faster, if you just. Easier, if you just. It would really help us if you just. The implication being that your time is elastic and theirs is precious, and the correct response is to absorb the request and carry it quietly and be grateful for the opportunity. I'm sure it would be, I said. The document is thorough. Good luck. And I hung up. On day 5, Donna called. I answered on the second ring. I'm sorry to bother you, she said immediately, which told me everything about how the previous 4 days had gone at Ashford Group. I read the transition document. I have some questions, but honestly, I'm mostly called to tell you that I understand why you did this, and I think you were right. I sat down on my couch and breathed out slowly. She told me that since I'd stepped back, Celeste had been trying to locate files she didn't know the names of. Ted had called 3 vendors using outdated contact information from 2 years ago, and Grant's brother had spent an entire morning attempting to understand the grant reporting portal before admitting he had never actually logged into it before. He kept asking me if the system was broken, Donna said. It's not broken, I said. I know, she said. He just assumed someone had always been there to make it work. We talked for 20 minutes. Before she hung up, she said quietly, "For what it's worth, I never believed what Celeste said at the party. I've been looking at these accounts for years. If anything had been off, I would have seen it. That meant more to me than an apology from Celeste ever could have." On day 6, Grant asked me to come to dinner at the Ashford house. A family dinner, he called it. I asked if his parents were planning to correct what Celeste had said publicly. He said he thought that's what the dinner was for. I told him I would come, but I was bringing documentation, and he needed to understand that ahead of time. He said, "You're not going to make this worse, are you?" I said, "That depends entirely on what you mean by worse." I drove to the Ashford house alone. Becca had offered to wait in the car 2 blocks away. I told her I appreciated it and meant it. She was there anyway, 2 blocks away, because she knows me and she knows that sometimes you need someone who sees you whole to be within reach, even if they never come inside. The dining room felt theatrical when I walked in. Celeste had set the table properly. Good china, water glasses, the centerpiece she used for occasions she wanted to look intentional. Ted stood at the head of the table with his hands in his pockets. Grant's brother had his arms crossed and his eyes on the window. Grant stood near his mother in a way that told me, without a word being spoken, where his body had decided to belong that night. 3 aunts I recognized from holidays sat along one side, plus 2 neighbors who had been at the birthday party, and Grant's college friend whose name I had never managed to retain, who apparently now felt invested in Ashford family governance. Nobody greeted me first. I sat down, set my folder on the table, and kept my coat on. Ted cleared his throat. "Ren," he started. "We thought it made sense to get everyone together because there's been a lot of confusion this week and we want to clear the air." I waited. Celeste spoke out of frustration at the party. He continued, "She didn't intend to make a public accusation. These things happen in families when people are under stress, and we think it's important to move forward rather than dwell on what?" I said. He paused. "Finish the sentence," I said. "Rather than dwell on what?" Celeste pressed her lips together. "On drama." I opened my folder and set the first document on the table. "This is a record of every task I performed for Ashford Group over the past 3 years, I said, "with dates, associated project codes, and estimated professional value based on standard billing rates for equivalent work. Total labor value, approximately $214,000. The room did something I can only describe as recalibrating." I kept going. "This is the grant administration file for the 2 active historic renovation grants. You have a quarterly reporting deadline in 11 days for Millbrook. The portal access credentials are on page 3. The reporting template is on page 4. The comparable from last quarter is attached as an exhibit." I slid it to Ted. "This is the vendor compliance record for all active subcontractors across 4 projects. Every COI expiration date is flagged. 3 are coming up in the next 30 days. Contact information is current as of last week." I handed that one to Grant's brother, who took it without meeting my eyes. And this, I said, setting the last document face down for just a moment before I turned it over, is a financial variance analysis I conducted over the past 3 months, comparing project-level invoice approvals I processed against the amounts recorded in owner-level expense reports for the same transactions. The table went very still. The variances are documented by date, project, vendor, and amount. The total discrepancy across 18 months is approximately $34,000. I have not drawn any conclusions. I'm an accountant, not an auditor. But I think someone in this room should know this exists before the next time anyone uses the word stealing near my name. Ted's face had gone a particular shade that I recognized from years of watching people realize a document contains more than they expected. Celeste said quietly, "Where did you get those numbers?" "From the project accounts I managed," I said. "The ones your company gave me access to because I was the one reconciling them." Grant's brother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. One of the aunts picked up the labor record and started reading it. Then the other one did. Grant's college friend looked at the floor. Grant said my name again, just my name. The way he always did when he had no idea what came after it. Ted straightened in his chair and did what powerful men do when documents threaten them. He pivoted to the future. "Whatever questions you have about internal accounts," he said, "those are a separate conversation. What matters tonight is that we address what happened at the party and find a way to move forward as a family." "I agree," I said. "What happened at the party was a public accusation in front of 47 people. Moving forward, for me, looks like a public correction." Celeste inhaled sharply. "I am not going to make some kind of announcement. You made one," I said. "In the same room, in front of the same people, on my birthday." One of the aunts set the labor document down and looked at Celeste directly. "Carol," she started, then caught herself and used Celeste's actual name. "Celeste, did you have any real evidence when you said what you said at the party?" Celeste looked at her husband. Ted looked at the window. "I was concerned about irregularities," Celeste said at last. "In accounts that Wren managed?" the aunt asked. Silence. "Or in accounts she didn't have access to?" The room understood then, even the people who weren't accountants. Especially the people who weren't accountants, because non-accountants understand power, and they were watching someone realize in real time that she had aimed a very serious accusation at the wrong person. Celeste's chin came up. "I want to be clear that I never intended that evening to become a public accusation," the aunt said. "A scene," Celeste finished. "You called me a thief," I said, "in front of my husband's entire social circle. On my 30th birthday. The word you want is accusation, not scene." Grant finally said something other than my name. "Mom, you need to say it." She looked at him like he had stepped on her foot. "Say that Wren didn't steal anything," he said. "Just say it plainly." It took her a long moment. Long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer for everyone watching. Long enough that I understood, clearly and permanently, that the word wasn't going to come wrapped in anything that felt like remorse. It was going to come wrapped in necessity. "Wren did not steal from this family," Celeste said. It was the flattest sentence I had ever heard, but it was witnessed, and that was what I had come for. I stood, closed my folder, and said, "Thank you. Donna has everything she needs to keep operations running. I won't be available for Ashford Group's support going forward." Ted said, "The Millbrook deadline, page 3, I said, and picked up my coat. Grant followed me out to the front porch. He stood in the cold without his jacket and looked at me with the expression of a man watching something he chose not to protect walk away from him. "I didn't know she was going to do that at the party," he said. "I know," I said. "I didn't think it would go this far." "I know that, too." He asked if I was coming home. I told him I needed some time. He asked how much time. I told him I didn't know yet. He nodded slowly, and I understood that the nod was his version of acceptance, which was the closest he had ever come to accountability. I drove to Becca's, 2 blocks away, and sat in her kitchen while she made tea. I didn't drink, and I talked until I ran out of words, and then I sat quietly for a while, which is something you can only do with someone who doesn't need you to fill the room. The 11 days after the dinner were instructive. The Millbrook quarterly report was submitted 3 days late because Grant's brother couldn't navigate the portal alone, and Ted finally had to call the program officer directly and explain there had been an administrative transition. The program officer noted in the file, "One late report doesn't end Grant relationship, but it goes on record, and record matters." The Caldwell Street draw request was delayed because the reconciliation document submitted to the bank didn't match the supporting invoices in the way the bank's reviewer expected, which is a problem I would have caught in 40 minutes. It took 11 days and 2 rounds of clarification requests before the tranche released. The project timeline shifted. The contractor wasn't happy. 2 vendor COI renewals lapsed. Nothing catastrophic came from it immediately, but the general contractor on one project flagged it during a site meeting, and it required Ted to spend the better part of a day making calls he wouldn't have needed to make if the tracking system I'd built had been maintained. None of these were disasters. They were the ordinary consequences of removing professional-level work and replacing it with nothing. But consequences have a way of compounding in small businesses where reputation is infrastructure. By the end of the month, a commercial real estate broker who had referred 3 clients to Ashford Group over the past 2 years heard about the Grant reporting delay and the bank reconciliation issue from someone who worked adjacent to both. She didn't stop referring clients immediately. She just started asking more questions before she did. In a business built on trust and clean paperwork, more questions is how things end slowly. Grant and I had conversations, careful and exhausting, over several weeks. He said the right words more than once. He also, more than once, circled back to whether there was any version of things where I would reconsider staying involved with the business, just in a different capacity, just a consulting role, just until his parents found someone to replace what I'd been doing. Just. The word that makes labor sound like a small favor someone reasonable would grant. I told him I loved him, but I wasn't available to be his family's back-office infrastructure while being publicly accused of theft. That the 2 things, loving him and being willing to absorb what his family had done, were not the same thing, and I was no longer going to pretend otherwise. He understood, I think, in the way people understand things that cost them something they would rather not give up. The financial variances I had documented went to a forensic accountant I hired privately, a colleague of a colleague, someone with no connection to Ashford Group. She reviewed my analysis and my source documents and told me what I had suspected but hadn't been willing to name. The discrepancies weren't reclassifications, they weren't rounding, they were a pattern. Small amounts distributed across projects long enough to look like noise if you weren't looking carefully. I am a person who looks carefully. I won't tell you what happened next with that because it's still ongoing and some things aren't mine to narrate publicly before they're resolved. What I will tell you is that the accusation Celeste made at my birthday party, delivered in confidence and contempt, was aimed at the person in the room who was least likely to be doing what she described, and most likely to eventually figure out what was actually happening. That's not poetic justice. That's just what happens when you publicly humiliate the accountant. I moved out of the house Grant and I had shared 3 months after the birthday party. Not dramatically, not in the middle of the night with garbage bags. I rented a small apartment 20 minutes away, packed methodically over 2 weekends, and left a copy of the household expense spreadsheet I had maintained because I am constitutionally incapable of leaving a financial record in disorder. I kept my job, got assigned a new project with a bigger scope, and gave myself permission to stop being useful in rooms that didn't value it. Becca made me celebrate my 31st birthday in a restaurant with exposed brick and too loud music and a group of 8 people who knew my name without needing me to do something first. Donna left Ashford Group 4 months after the dinner and took an office manager position at a property company with actual HR policies and a functioning document management system. She texted me on her first day there. "Still not broken," she wrote with a small smile emoji. I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen for the first time in a long time. There's something I want to say that I couldn't have articulated the night I walked out of my own birthday party. Coat under my arm, 47 people's silence behind me. The real damage wasn't the accusation. People recover from false accusations when the record speaks clearly enough. The real damage was the years before it, the slow agreement I had entered into without ever being asked to sign anything. The arrangement where my competence was a resource the family could access, and my personhood was incidental to that access. The birthday party was just the moment that arrangement became impossible to ignore. I had told myself I was helping. I was, but I was also waiting for something that was never coming, for a family to decide I was worth valuing beyond what I could fix for them. Some families are not built to offer that. Some people will take everything you give them and still find a way to make you feel like the debt is yours. I'm not angry anymore, not the sharp, hot kind of angry I drove home with that night. I'm mostly just clear. Clear about what I'll offer and to whom and what reciprocity I need to feel like myself. Clear about the difference between love and usefulness. Clear, finally, about the difference between being someone's family and being someone's infrastructure. I stopped saving them, and that was enough. The antagonists in this story are unsettling for a specific reason. Celeste and Ted weren't cruel in the way people imagine cruelty. Loud, obvious, cartoonish. They were cruel the way institutions are cruel. Quietly, through structure, through the slow accumulation of assumptions that never got challenged because the person absorbing them kept showing up anyway. What Celeste did at that birthday party was the loudest thing she ever did. But the real damage had been building for 3 years in the silences. Every email forwarded without a please, every task absorbed without a thank you, every outcome claimed without an acknowledgement of who actually built it. The public accusation was just the moment the arrangement became impossible to look away from. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in any mystical sense, but in the plain mechanical way that an accountant thinks about it. Actions produce outcomes. What you choose to do and what you choose not to do compounds over time in both directions. Celeste chose to publicly accuse the one person in the room who understood the numbers better than anyone. That choice set a chain of events in motion that she could not control once it started. Because I had spent 3 years building a paper trail without knowing I was going to need it. That's the thing about integrity as a daily practice rather than a grand gesture. I didn't keep meticulous records because I was planning anything. I kept them because I'm someone who believes that accuracy matters even when nobody is watching. That habit, that quiet daily discipline of doing the work correctly and documenting it thoroughly, ended up being the thing that protected me when someone tried to rewrite the story of what I had done. Ren's story, which is my story, is really about the difference between being useful and being valued, and the long, quiet cost of confusing the two. I gave years of real professional skill to a family that needed it. That giving wasn't wrong. What was wrong was the agreement I never consciously made, to be available without limits, to absorb without complaint, to translate my competence into service, and then accept invisibility as the price of belonging. The courage it took to stop wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like bravery in the moment. It felt like finally deciding to tell the truth about a math problem I had been fudging for years. The numbers didn't add up. What I was putting in and what I was getting back were not equal. And I am, at the end of everything, an accountant. I know how to read a ledger. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is that your expertise is real. Your time is real. Your competence is real. And none of those things become more valuable by being given away quietly to people who never intend to account for them. The discipline to walk away from a situation that costs you more than it gives you, even when the situation is wrapped in the language of family, of loyalty, of just helping out, that is not coldness. That is the clearest form of self-respect there is. Celeste's accusation was wrong, but it did one thing I'll always be quietly grateful for. It made the invisible visible. And once I could see the full picture, I couldn't keep pretending it balanced.